Well, so I was talking to Louis Rodriguez last night for the Idyllwild Writers Week. Wednesdays at 4 Craft Talks. And Louis, in his 70s, has been involved in activism and things for a zillion years. And the way his take on crisis, this crisis, other crisis, is that it's all sorts of things, but it's also an initiation. It's a collective initiation is a way of looking at a crisis. And I thought that was pretty wise way of describing it. This is a collective initiation into something. And like all initiations, it can seem overly symbolic, overly dramatic, disorienting. But then, we're initiates into a new thing.
Yes.
Whatever. He was putting a lot of heavy emphasis on ritual, having private and public rituals as a way of healing and getting accustomed to it. I mean, an initiation is a ritual. I mean, it's a ritual activity. It needs some sort of shape to it.
Yeah, and we've lost a lot of that, I think, in the, that's, I need to reread that book. It's recorded, right? That conversation we had with them. I think I saw it on Facebook. I'll have to check that out. So I've never
recorded. It was recorded. I don't know if they're keeping it available now or if it's being archived. But,
okay. Very cool. I was a day late and $1 short on seeing that pop up on social media. But it looked great.
Yeah.
Are we, Kristen, are we
about live?
Started?
Yeah, we're live. We are broadcasting. Do you all want to go ahead and get started?
Yeah.
Are you ready?
Sure. Did you have anything did you have any announcements or anything?
Yeah, just a few housekeeping announcements. So, and then I'll hand it off to you, Brad. One thing, I want to thank the Raven bookstore here in Lawrence, Kansas for being a partner in this. Danny ordered a bunch of Ed's new book, mailed the books to Ed for signing. Ed is now signing them, and then he'll mail them back to Danny. So if you buy a book from the Raven bookstore, you will get a signed copy from Ed. So there's
That's right. That's right.
Where you can order, and then they have you can order them and then pick them up, and they put it out on a little table, so it's very safe and socially distanced. And that's how our book signing works these days. We are recording this, and it's also being streamed on Facebook, so just an FYI on that. And then there will be a Q&A, so if you have questions for Ed or Brad, please either you can put them in the chat, or there's a little Q&A icon at the bottom of the screen, and you can put your questions there. And now I'll hand stuff off to our executive director, Brad Allen.
Thanks, Kristen. Everybody silence your cell phones. Don't forget to do that in your homes, or keep yourself on mute. We don't need any interruptions. Yeah, this is the first time I've really done anything like this. I had a conversation with our mayor last month or so. So I'm really thrilled to be here with Ed. Ed was supposed to be in Lawrence 2 months ago, maybe almost to the day, in celebration of his new book for Paper Planes, which sadly has had to be postponed, like so many things. So we thought it'd be great to have Ed come in on Zoom and chat. And so my job really, I think, to start is kind of to introduce Ed a bit, and then we'll get into some reading and talking a little bit, and then have time for folks to ask some questions also. I don't know how much of a formal introduction Ed wants, but I will start by saying that I have known of Ed Skoog since the 8th, possibly 7th grade. The 7th grade. In Model UN, I was the representative for the Fiji Islands. And so I was in the Asian bloc at Washburn University, and there was this towering high schooler who was the delegate from China that was Ed Skoog. and he kind of ran our block, and I was like, who is this guy? And it was just his presence was, like I never forgot it. And I think maybe he was the Soviet Union the following year. I can't really remember. I get it all mixed up. But I just remember seeing and being in awe of Ed as a middle schooler from a small little island country. and then ran into him again at Kansas State University. And I was like, this is that same guy from Model UN. And we're fellow Topekans. And so then I had the pleasure of getting to know Ed as a friend, and it's been a lot of fun knowing Ed in the different places that we've lived and apart. Ed, in addition to being an extremely good Model UN delegate, he is also the author of 4 collections of poetry. His newest he'll be reading from tonight. And the other 3, I just want to make sure I get it right here because I have bad memory, are Mr. Skylight was the first, Rough Day and Run the Red Lights. I was trying to figure out when did Mr. Skylight come out? I've lost track of time.
10 or 11 years ago.
Okay.
2009, late in 2009. So 11 years.
So Ed's a poet, a teacher, just a lovely person, a great person to hang out with on Zoom. He has magical Zoom skills. I don't know if he'll share them with you tonight. But did you want to just kind of start off reading something for us, Ed?
Sure. So this is the book, Travelers Leaving for the City. And I see that my friend Donovan Finn's on here, and there's a line about Donovan in here, but I'll save that for a later bit. See what's a good start one. Well, let me start out with a short poem. This is the last poem in the book called The Iron. A lot of the book is about traveling, arriving, departing. This is about one of the pleasures of hotel rooms. The Iron. My son likes to stay in hotels because they have great pools. But what I like is ironing a shirt with the iron the hotel supplies on the board that folds into the wall, with the TV low, and whatever weather is going on outside in its most intense and local phase. And what I feel in those moments is both anonymous and myself, not father, not son. My mother was full of warnings about hotels. One warning was, never leave a glass beside your bed, or you may fling out your hand and slice your wrist. And so I don't. But then my son, back from the swimming pool, says, if you die wearing glasses, your ghost will wear glasses. I like to take off my glasses, entering, then go to the window and look out. Let me read a couple of the short ones from the back of the book instead of where the tone is sort of settling down as opposed to the beginning, which is kind of about riling up. Night. Another poem about a kid, my kid. Night. He wants the lamp on. Night is a kind of work. He says, leave it on, although he is still in a great way asleep. I, who am still asleep, leave on the envoy, who is always trying to be turned off. These murmurs, am I even aware of them? The distance is uninteresting, and the commercials get caught in the webbing of my eyebrows. Bring me the head of Ed Skoog again. I am at the whale competition. See me in the highlight reel. Here is how you draw a face. Draw anything. And a poem called Topeka Nuns, N-O-N-E-S, as in the sort of the hour of prayer, the series of prayers in a monastery, matins, compline. The nuns is like a dinner hour prayer, evening prayer. It's probably pronounced nones, but I like calling it nuns. Topeka nuns. The alley behind my father's house is like my father, becoming weary in the afternoon, reading in his burgundy chair. A yard dog naps in the silence before it wakes, to jangle collar like a jailer. A blue jay calls after a train, both of them unseen, like time, and its freight layered in boxcars. What is being carried through me? On the other side of the train, I suppose it's the river that's gray. Probable farms glisten. In the alley, the trash truck's mouth goes maw, maw, maw. Ants row up the fence posts and become the golden saccharin of the honeysuckle. Yeah, that alley ran up Greenwood, a couple blocks behind your uncle's or granduncle's house.
Yeah,
Wasn't he
great
up?
uncle.
Newt?
Yeah, Uncle Newt.
Judge Vickers. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Your dad spoke
this is
at his retirement. I'm pretty sure he was the president of the Bar Association. He spoke at his retirement.
Oh, they were friends. Yeah, they were.
The Phelpses picketed his retirement.
Yeah.
At the Holiday Inn, I think, or wherever it was.
Yeah, man, they'd picket anything, you know. Oh, they do.
Apparently, he helped get Phelps disbarred. I don't know how true that is, but I don't know. But they were there for the fun.
Yeah. Yeah. Man, they'd picket anything. They'd see a thing and they'd picket it. They'd probably picketed breakfast. Their own breakfast. I hope so. This is a poem. This is about a guy I knew in school who there's been a poem about him in every book. His name is Larry O'Neill. He's just a friend from Potwin Elementary who lived over by the there's a house that has a plaque, I think where the guys in the band Kansas might have lived at one point, over by the Plasma Center that used to be a grocery store up on 6th Street between Mcveigh and Lindenwood. And Larry was real poor, and his family had a lot of bad luck. They had worked a good year, and then his dad got laid off and never got, the layoffs are happening all the time, and he never got back on the line. And he had a tough time, and then he got murdered in the parking lot of, it's now called the Booby Trap, but it was called Goofy's at the time. This poem's called American Football. The shoe goes on my foot, like a forest on a bear. We eat with the crushed teeth of the middle class, a diplomacy of lovers out for a walk, immoderately lost in time. The dead move like cars, with snow on them. We learn it from our mothers, who know that life is combat. The tactic of the oppressor is to get others to do its work. Becoming a racist was an important part of becoming the oppressor, but it was not the only part. Third squad of the 8th grade football team, uncoached, I observed we beat up Larry O'Neill, called him a cockroach because someone had seen a cockroach in the small kitchen of the small house in the corner of Topeka beside the Plasma Donation Center, a urology clinic, a house the guitarist of the band Kansas lived in for a while. Dust in the Wind, the cover of the album, John Brown from the mural, who would understand the dynamic that late afternoon, that football afternoon of mouthguard and shoulder pad, helmet instead of brain, white, black, and Mexican, native. We all had a good time pushing Larry into the mud, him getting back up. I don't know if they ever arrested who stabbed him in the parking lot of a Topeka bar a few years later. Was it me? It wasn't not me, in some sense, that I was also never Larry, and that I feed my masculinity every day with scraps. Or do I give it my first bite? The monster figure would be ashamed and proud, I thought, for me not to have been the subject of the blows and jeers this time. And in a uniform, the good people wilt in the crystal vase where the fascists allow them to behave. So there's a few poems from the book. A few cheerful Kansas poems.
Well, yeah, I was curious to talk a little bit about the structure of the book, if that's something that's of interest to you. You know, it's divided into three parts. There's the main part that's kind of the set piece of the collection of poems that the title is named after, and kind of a middle piece, and then this third piece of shorter poems. Do you want to talk about the decisions on constructing the book in that manner?
Well, I don't remember writing most of the book. It really felt very much like a cooperation with the place in my head where I could sort of speak with my grandfather, who had been murdered in the 50s, and which initiated this book. And so the poem begins trying to understand that moment and the circumstances, which he was shot by a gunman trying to kidnap his, the gunman's girlfriend from a cheap hotel in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, in the 50s. And my grandfather, who was a probably gay, alcoholic, out of work steelworker, combat vet, was stepped in to try to stop the gunman and got shot in the process and died. My grandmother divorced him years ago. He was not part of my mother's upbringing, so he was already kind of a silence, a lacuna in her life. But afterwards, I think, was a different kind of silence in absence. And I've always wondered just how that affected the way that she shaped and envisioned me and my four brothers, sort of raising this batch of sons, and thinking of how that affected the language that we had, the imagination that we had, the sense of possibility and creativity and doom and tragedy that was implied or talked around or ignored. I didn't know about it until after she died. But I didn't. The whole book isn't just about that. I mean, that was an entry to a lot of other questions and mysteries that I have about the arrivals and departures of people in this world, people I love, myself, the passage from father to child, parent to child, mother, all of that ancestry, and how important it is and how completely irrelevant it is at the same time to the present moment, which is where the poem is. I mean, the poem is an intensely present moment that is not interested. The lyric moment is not part of history. It's outside of time in lots of ways. And I found a lot of energy in trying to lay those two notes next to each other, and the kind of distortion and feedback that comes from that. So I began thinking about other hotels, other murderers, other passages, other departures. I thought a lot about just kind of the troop of people moving through the world that's in one's own imagination, that the self is only part of. I thought of the travelers in the Canterbury Tales and the Decameron, and the figures in Buñuel movies and Fellini movies, and just the picking up and going. I thought a lot about scrolls. I mean, scrolls that depict journeys, in which the whole journey is sort of simultaneous. The taking off, the arrival, the departures are all kind of happening at the same time, because they all are happening at the same time for different people. Someone's arrival is someone else's departure. So the book goes to other places. Timothy McVeigh, at the hotel in Junction City, the night before he goes down and blows up the Oklahoma City Federal Building, I think is another version of, is another traveler, you know. One of the things that animates the book is my reading of the correspondence between the poets Denise Levertov and Robert Duncan, who were two mid-century kind of West Coast countercultural poets, who had a falling out that was the end of their long, meaningful friendship. You can read it in their letters during the Vietnam War, in which Levertov was protesting the war in her writing, but also with her body. She and her husband going down to protests and getting arrested and all that. And Duncan, who was in many ways a more radical person, thought that was outrageous, that wasn't the poet's role to sort of participate as a citizen in the life of this community. You know, he thought, which I think is bullshit, and she thought so also, and called him a coward. But what he said, I think, did land a blow, which is that the poet's job is not to oppose evil, but to imagine it. Because only you can oppose it, you can oppose evil, that does not mean that you understand, you get any closer to love, right? But he says if you can imagine evil, then you can imagine love. And that's powerful, right? The way to compassion is more to the side. And so I thought about, you know, it's easy to imagine getting shot. You know, I mean, it's like you can imagine getting hit by a car or hit by a meteor, right? You think you're worried all the time about something like that happening, right? But I'm trying to imagine what, you know, killing someone, being a murderer, and I don't want to think about it, but so I thought, well, who's the worst person that I can think of? And it's Timothy McVeigh, probably. He blew up the federal building, including, you know, 57 children or something. But because he, you know, sort of passed through Kansas on the way there, I sort of have always, you know, and it happened, you know, when I was in my early 20s, and it was, I can sort of imagine him. I can't imagine doing it really, but I can sort of imagine the places, you know, the Dreamland Motel in Junction City, which I drove by many times. And, you know, so there's a long poem in the book from his point of view that was painful to write, and I think no fun to read, except it's, you know, it's art. It's fun to experience art. But, you know, I was trying to understand the other side, and hopefully come out being able to understand compassion a little bit more, by sort of walking beside its opposite. So the structure of the book, hopefully, is encountering crisis. As we started out talking about, crisis is a kind of initiation, and encountering crisis, moving towards compassion and understanding. That was my experience in writing it, and that was part of the idea behind the structure of it. Is that hopefully, if you read it from start to finish, which is not the best way to read a book of poems, because it's not a novel, skip around. But that's what think I'm tracing with these poems when I look back at them. I arrived, I think, at a different place. Certainly, I arrived at a different place in relationship to those initiating events. I understand them differently and myself differently, which is, you know, good for me. But you know, I think the poems create a similar experience, or follow the path of the language of that kind of change.
The Mcveigh poem is really powerful. I just read it yesterday or the day before. It's really, so I had gotten through the first third of the book, and then got distracted with all of the nonfiction that I'm reading, and I'm like, damn, I gotta finish Ed's book. And so I read that and all the rest of it in pretty quick succession, and it's a tremendous poem. And yeah, I just, you know, I'm not well versed in poetry at all, and so when you think of, you know, I mean, I think a lot of people think of poems as something that stands alone as a poem, and so to think about, you know, all the different pieces of the book that go together with the set piece of connected poems, the middle piece, and then the others seem to, so it's interesting to hear you talk about thinking about all of those other poems at the end of the book through this thread and narrative. That's really interesting to hear and to think about in that context.
I mean, ultimately, the individual poem is what has to stand on it. Every poem has to stand on its own, But a book is kind of a conveyance of poems. It's the book is the biscuit and the poems are the gravy, I guess. I'm thinking of things that convey one thing conveying another thing.
Yeah. As really a poetry novice, I don't know if it's really even worth asking this question, but it is just something that I'm interested in. I love listening to you read your poems, and I love listening to Ben Lerner read his poems just as another poet that I think I saw Eric McHenry on here too, watching him read his poems, articulating the way that the book is phrased. I'm curious about, in this book, and maybe I'm just forgetting the other ones a little bit more, the way that you place the words on the page was interesting to me. It's taking up a lot of space in different ways, in kind of a blank verse way that I don't know enough about, but I was just curious about, things like that. And so I was trying to, good example, Ed. And so I was trying to figure out, is it worth asking the question, the deliberation that you take on where you're placing the words on the page? And I was trying to imagine how I would phrase it in my mind, because I would get lost in some of the poems more easily than others, because I'm just not skilled in reading verse and reading poems in a book, I guess would be the simplest way to explain that.
I mean, prose, a newspaper, an essay, a novel, it starts from the left margin and goes all the way to the right margin, and it doesn't matter, right? Most poetry starts at the left margin, and then, there's a line break, but it generally goes back to the left margin, and that creates a music, that creates a rhythm. For this book, I wanted to use some of the opportunities of not being on the left margin, and how that can affect the timing of reading, and kind of can help incorporate the body language of gesture a little bit more, and make something, it kind of works in the hands, the timing, the stutter, the stammer, the pauses, and then the urgency, and some of those sort of the music of body language, I think can be sort of duplicated by the arrangement of words on the page. So that was a prosodic choice that I made, to try to. It seemed sympathetic with the feeling that I had in writing the books, of being sort of guided, of sort of searching for words, searching for phrases, searching for passages, and it being a kind of a give and take, a kind of listening and receiving, as much as it is. And in a way, one of the things that I search for ways to do in my poetry, and I see this in a lot of poetry that I admire, are ways to kind of step back from the power relationship of poet, that is historical, in which the poet is an authority figure, or a priest, or somebody who is reporting on their findings, and I have no findings, I have an experience, and I think a lot of my poems, I hope, and a lot of the poems I like, feel like there's something that's happening between the reader and the writer, the speaker and the listener, in which the reader is as much a participant in creating this thing that poetry is the word for, with an immediacy and liveliness. That's what I hope for. And so the way that the poems are on the page, hopefully, is a way of enacting that relationship. There was a face. Ideally, I think poems you should have the feeling of talking to somebody face to face, right? Because you're at the top of your intelligence when you're talking to somebody face to face. There's some contract, some obligation that you have when you're talking face to face, to try to say something that's worth the other person's time, and you're responding to the other face. I think poems are kind of faces in a way. There's a lot of thinking and criticism and philosophy about faces right now, and faces is the face and self, and what happens between faces as being the beginning of morality, and civilization really is a face looking at another face, and reacting and responding and creating something as a result of those responses. And I think sort of the shape of a sonnet or a lyric poem that's about a page it approximates a face. To look at a poem is sort of can be to look at a face. So I try to write like that, so that I try to think of it that way, so that I am, in the act of writing it, feeling that obligation, that conversational obligation, to say something worth listening to, instead of just delivering pronouncements. which as you've seen me in Model UN is an instinct that I have. I mean, I am a tyrant, and a bully, and a lot of my writing poetry has been trying to find ways to not be tyrannical and to not bully.
That's really powerful, Ed. That I like that. I like that. Oh no, it's true. I mean, I think about that some. Just I mean, I think a lot of us do in your life when you have been an orator, and it is, and like I am notorious for enjoying to talk too much, but that can be very much a pronouncement and not a conversation. And it's really just kind of talking to hear yourself talk, and that, and I can see that the way that I read these poems is very much not that. It is really trying to draw the person in, like conversational is too, like, that's too, I don't know, generic and non-poetic of a word to use, but I see that. It always feels very conversational when I read your poetry. We had Phyllis Kopp wanted to see, you showed a page of the book. Would you show a page of the book again that kind of just shows the breakup? We had a question from the chat.
I can't.
Yeah, that's kind of showing, one of the pages that's a little bit more spread out in space.
Yeah. The term for it, I suppose, is projective verse, projecting from the margin. I'm certainly not inventing it. It's been around.
Oh yeah, but I felt like I saw it. You see it in some of the poems more than some of the others. I was just curious to hear kind of the thoughts you had behind doing that. It's like you say, most very traditional poetry is exactly how you described it earlier, kind of on the starting on the left, moving things around, just having a structure, things like that. It's a little bit more traditional, for lack of a better word, for me. Do you want to read something else for us?
Yeah, this is a part of a long poem called Tarentum. I don't know if Donovan's still here, so there's a line about Donovan's in. So this is a 9 or 10 page poem in the book that's in sections and covers a lot of territory. This is just a passage of it. As a kid in Topeka, when it was under the highway across gravel to go over the Burlington Northern, slurred, coupled, at night the sound came into houses of Greenwood and Woodlawn, sat down, ate onion soup. Mornings faster, afternoons you could climb up ladder over the handshake and down to the river, the color of a banker's shoe, always carrying a little life, a little death. But also I see a chain link fence reflected in a puddle, other puddle reflections, places where puddles dry up in stages, the cracks written there, the flakes, the traces. It is as though someone took a rock, smashed the back window of the moment, the way Donovan and I shot out the back window of a police car with a BB gun. What was I keeping there for later? The butcher at Walter's grocery glories he hasn't killed anything, only made cuts here and there, a dot of blood on his sienna mustache. I walk into new shoes. I head to the hotel again, like a beautiful stranger coming down the street carrying very little, to not meet me. I saw a screening of Jackie Brown at Aurora Avenue in Seattle. We were a test audience. Tarantino was there. His long black coat was there. Some of you, already dead, have known more than the sash cord, which I know is tied behind the panel to significant weight. In older homes, the cord becomes specter thin and breaks. Few people know how easy it is to slip screwdriver into wood to open the side door, slip new cord through, tie like fishhook. My cold, numb fingers try to knot on the shores of Duck Lake in onrushing snow, seal it up like a mausoleum. But what has really been pawing at me like a neglected companion is the concealed heaviness behind the simplest surfaces. How most of the time I have no idea how to begin repair. People are blown away in movies. Tarantino. None of us is long here, but most of us will make it through. Night is where the constellation is that I'm looking up at from the yard. Orion, probably, his Molossus belt. My grandfather was blown away, became one more unmoored figure in the fading star map that spreads over my city in power blackouts. Looking up, I tell my son he should see the very old things in the sky. Let's go inside, he says. But stay in the front window where I can see you. For now, that's where we are. On either side of the house's plate glass cataract, the windows sliding up, sliding down, while the weight does invisible work in lamplight, in starlight. Imagine one another. No leaves where my grandfather's body was remanded, blow away. Military cemetery in Pittsburgh, haven't been. All memory of him except this poem is blown away. That one goes on. This poem is called Pittsburgh. Probably should have read it first to clear some things up. This was in the New Yorker magazine last year.
Yay, Ed!
Yeah, I just like to mention that. I sent them every poem I'd written since about 1992. They finally bit. And with it, with the money I got from it, I bought an apple tree, which I planted out here. And then on March 13th, the first real day of kind of the pandemic shutdown, somebody heard there was toilet paper at the convenience store and was driving too fast and ran into my yard and took out my apple tree, my New Yorker apple tree.
No.
It was too good. I can't have good things.
Well,
I
that'll maybe
don't
be
deserve
the
good things.
Next collection of poems. The New Yorker will publish that one.
Yeah.
Or the Atlantic.
Yeah. No, whatever. I don't care. Well, I'm mentioning it just mostly to tell the story about the apple tree.
That's horrible.
Oh,
I'm sorry for your tree.
thank you. Pittsburgh isn't there anymore. Rode by it on the gray horse, and instead a place where they go sick, a place of only mist. To properly understand the 12 Pittsburghs of the heart, but nothing to grasp or die for. And when the adults told me to cry, I sang on the uneven riser, which swirls like northern lights in the ear. In 1955, my mother's father, a steelworker, was shot and killed in his hotel. Intervening in an abduction attempt, the shooter crazed and lovesick, according to his mother. My mother only met her father a few times. The last time, shortly before the murder, she said she took a train. In the testimony of another tenant, his face, after he staggered out of the apartment, burned an iron color. He fell into her arms. I was holding him, trying to help, she said. The kidnapper escaped with his axe, and they drove the outskirts of Pittsburgh, Tarentum, Aspenwall, Turtle Creek all night, before she talked him into turning himself in at dawn. Clouds are in a composition useful to fill space around the invisible. In moonlight, the murderer and the owl who buries and the bull who rings drove rural Allegheny County, stopped at midnight for hot dogs and milk, according to the transcript of the trial, heard the luminous processes of the dashboard. I suppose he sang like a scarf gone out long behind, like magnetism, like thorn bushes, like wind around a highway sign. He went up and asked if anyone was dead again, why they need to assert themselves, even after we told them about sorrow. I think my grandfather's ghost rode alongside them 11 miles, peering in before departing. Who wasn't with him the night he was killed? Like hearing a stranger's headphones in the spirit of canceled flight and a storm coming. She missed the beard he was growing. We put our gods in clouds. We hide in clouds. Pittsburgh. I've never been to Pittsburgh. It sounds dangerous based on family accounts. See a lot of chat things. Does anybody?
Yeah, say we've got some things in chat and some in Q&A. Ed knew better than me where I am. There was a question where I am. Do you want to tell them where I am, Ed?
Oh, you look like you're in Palm Springs, facing Mount San Jacinto, where I used to live on top of that mountain, or near the top, in the town of Idyllwild. Well, I mean, the mountain's 11,000 feet. We were at 6,000. But that was enough for it to not be Palm Springs. It wasn't very modern up in Idyllwild. It was very A-frame cabins. Rattlesnakes, I guess, the same. It was a very important place to me. I think it's a very special place.
Was this one of the first years that I'm guessing teaching isn't going on there this summer? You go there most summers, right?
This is the first summer since 2006 that I haven't spent some of in Idyllwild. I help run a little writers conference there, Idyllwild Writers Week, with Victoria Chang and Heather Companion. And we had a great lineup this year. Carl Phillips and Tommy Pico, Vu Tran, and a lot of people. And we had, I don't know, we usually get 70, 80 people up there for workshops and talks. And they had to cancel it this year. And I miss being in Idyllwild and kind of checking in on the mountain, which is dynamic and is always changing. And I miss the drive, kind of going down, checking in on California, north to south.
Yeah, that's a cool drive.
Yeah.
It's a great drive.
Yeah.
But do you want to, let's see, let me look here in the Q&A as we've got.
I'm looking here. I see my friend BJ Saloy says hello. Hello, BJ. Says, do you sit down thinking about Portland or Missoula or New Orleans or Topeka? Or do you start writing and then let editing try to make sense or place of it? Well, I mean, I generally launch into a poem based on a memory. And those are the places where most of my memories are. So I'm not trying to say anything about Portland or Missoula or New Orleans or Topeka. I'm just sort of using some memory or language as a way to enter into something. And then, the poem tends to stay there in those places. And I suppose ultimately they're made up, the Portland and Missoula and DC and Topeka that I write about are really, of the mind, not really the real place, but sort of locations in my head as much as locations on the map that have certain meanings and relationships. I think that's why I return to them, not because one more person needs to express something about Missoula, but because, that's just sort of that's one of the frames that I have. And when I return to it, I find something new about my that space in my head, my imagination. I suppose when I sit down, I try not to tell the same story or, have the same imagery. But sometimes I do. Friend Sarah Rupp says, where'd you find your passion for writing, at K-State or before? Hi, Sarah, and any other Rupps watching. I loved writing since I started, since second grade. And I've just kind of followed that ever since. It helped that I wasn't good at anything else. So it was the one thing I would get A's on in school. And that sort of, I would take that as permission to continue not being good at other things. I just wanted to read and write my whole life, and that's what I'm trying to do. It's as hard to do at 48 as it was at 8 to figure out ways to do it. But K-State was very encouraging to me. I should have probably gone to KU or had not skipped all of my high school classes and gotten into a college that would have been perhaps even more traditionally encouraging. But K-State, because K-State's a big school, but there weren't that many people there who were really interested in writing, and I, knew and loved all 20 of us who were either in the English department or at the Collegian. And so I found that sort of the encouragement of the small cadre, and it probably became more committed because the general atmosphere of K-State was not encouraging of free thinking and weirdness. And I think well, that's not surprising to anybody, but it sort of made us scrappier. I think if you had an intellect, you had to be scrappier with it. And I think that, so we certainly weren't coddled there. I had fun at K-State. But I don't think I was challenged particularly. It's easy to be lazy at K-State. So that was great for a poet, Now, Phyllis asks again if I could talk more about risk as initiation. And I'd love to go further, but I'll just refer you to Louis J. Rodriguez. Take a look at his website, because he's been posting a lot of the talks he's been giving lately, interviews, where he talks more eloquently than me, and I'm borrowing a lot of his language about healing and crisis as an initiation. I don't want to try to take credit for it, but it's, I think, a helpful way to frame the crisis that we're all going through, as a collective initiation into something. And that also explains why it's so difficult, because initiation is intentionally difficult. And my dear friend Legine says, what do you tell your students about writing poetry to help them over their fears and hangups and insecurities? Well, it's helpful that generally I don't have any students. I'm not teaching right now. So I don't have to tell anybody anything. But when I do teach, I was teaching at the University of Montana last year, teach occasionally. I don't know, fears and hangups and insecurities about writing. That's the topics, and that's what to write about. I mean, write about the fears, write about the hangups, write about the insecurities. That seems like a good starting place for a poem. So those are some questions. Suzanne asks, given that poetry is so subjective, how do you approach grading poetry students? I was really delighted when school kind of collapsed in March, and I was teaching at the University of Montana, the graduate students in an undergraduate workshop. I quickly realized that any attempt to continue teaching was fraudulent and bullshit, and so I just gave everybody an A, and and that's what I was going to give them anyway. But for a creative writing class, for the most part, I mean, you're just going to get an A. If you slack off and don't do the work, and I'm not going to I don't think a creative writer. I don't see how a poetry workshop leader is going to change you if you're the kind of person who's going to do that. You still might get something out of it. I guess you can grade on, do you come to class? Did you turn anything in? But I certainly never want to be in the position. And sometimes I'm an editor or a judge for a prize or something, and I really hate it's flattering to be asked to do that sort of thing. It's kind of an ego stroke. Somebody thinks that you're, worthy of making those choices. But I mean, even the most perceptive critic and editor is going to be mostly making mistakes and saying no to things that probably should, find a public, and maybe, helping to publication things that are, certainly no better than most of the things that aren't getting to publication. But, and so same with grading and assessing people. The more, the most useful workshops I've been in, just like with friends, or other poets, are those in which we share the poems and then we don't try to critique them. We just kind of nod and say, yes, there goes another one. That seems as useful as saying, well, in the third line, you wrote enough with a GH. How about ENUFF? Perhaps that might be more expressive of emotion. I think the poems really are like sketches. And they come out the way that they come out, and you can turn them into something else. But I think the best thing to do is just move on to the next sketch, and instead of trying to make something perfect, make something new. And try not to die. Seems like good advice.
It's hard writing poems when you're dead, I think.
Well,
I mean, maybe not. I wouldn't know.
Might be easier. Let's see. So those are the ones. Those are the questions that were in the Q&A.
And there's another to tell them about your podcast, Ed.
Oh, we haven't. My friend, the novelist J. Robert Lennon, John Lennon, and I started a podcast in 2012 when it seemed like, aren't there already enough podcasts at that point? Before exponentially more. Now, and mostly just because it gave us an excuse to talk every week about food and books and whatever we wanted to. And we still call it weekly, although it's often 2 or 3 months between podcasts, but then it'll be weekly for a while. I suppose we've done 150 or something of them. Now it's called Lunchbox with Ed and John. And I've loved having the opportunity just to talk to John frequently. I don't know if we would make it such an appointment conversation if we weren't trying to make a show of it, but I don't think making a show of it has changed the content of it, of our conversations that we have. We used to have lunch every Monday when we lived in Montana decades ago, and we thought what a privilege it would be for others to be able to hear our conversation, and if only there was some technology that would allow that to happen. And then when the technology did appear, we quickly restored our appointment. And it's been helpful. I mean, it's helpful the way that therapy is helpful. Just helpful to talk to this. It's just helpful to talk a lot, to somebody who will listen. And I like talking with John, and I know that I've got a circle of friends that listen, so it's a way for us both to also talk to Our friends, and I suppose there's some people who we don't know who listen, but I don't know why they would. But there's some people. John certainly has a lot of readers as a novelist. I think people who like his novels find their way to the podcast and listen to it once or twice. But
how is John? I haven't caught up with John in a while. How is he? When's the last
well,
time?
we'll be doing our basically lunchbox next week as part of the Idyllwild Wednesdays at 4 craft talk and reading series, because he'll be our guest for that, which will probably be just an episode essentially of our conversation. He's great. He's got 2 books coming out, a fantastic novel and a book of strange short stories, kind of in the vein of his Pieces for the Left Hand, which I think has become, a lot of people have been finding it lately, internationally. I think it's kind of taking on a life of its own. A number of filmmakers have made short films from it.
Oh, wow.
I think it's become a really influential book of weird little short stories. But he's great. He's been cooking a lot. I've been getting updates of his quarantine cooking. A lot of ambitious dishes, sort of things that you can make after your kids are grown and mostly out of the house. With an 8-year-old, my diet is 90% macaroni and 20% cheese.
I'm increasingly familiar with that.
Yeah, that's right.
Looks like you have one more question here. Have you ever had a dream that caused you to write a poem?
Who's posing the question?
Suzanne. Right.
Okay, it depends who's asking. Yes, a lot of my writing comes from dreams. I also try to write fiction, and I haven't been as successful as that. But it often almost always has its origin in a dream. Very, very often I'll have not so much the language of a dream, but some image that I'll or some tone or timbre that I'll try to write from. And there's one of the first poem in the book is from an experience that, it's almost exactly what happened. I was driving down to Idyllwild a few summers ago, and I stopped in Sacramento. That's kind of the halfway point. And I stayed at a hotel downtown. And now that I look back, I'm not sure whether this really happened or if it was a dream. I think it happened. But at the end of it, I wrote, this is word for word, and in the arrangement of it's exactly what I wrote as soon as I wrote that night. And it's called My Shirt. And now I look at, I think I was informed by a fantastic and terrifying poem by Franz Wright about a shirt. But I don't think I stole anything. I think that poem just shook me, and then years later it might have affected this shirt. I don't know. It was a spooky shirt. My shirt. I grabbed the shirt off the hook on my way out into the night and bore it past the cathedral where a wedding was being swept up, and offered it to the man falling asleep against the embankment. He said the shirt wasn't his and waved me down the alley. The shirt made a face and wanted me to wear it. I said maybe in the morning. Then, as the rat chattered under the car in the pre-flight lounge, I set it on the piano and hurried back towards my own losses, the keys alternating with shadow, the white of a parasite bird's hunger. And on the wind I heard the silkworms, a thread maker, a tailor, telling me that around the corner a horrible infant would be calling my name, and was, only it was the emptiness of generations, and a vine coming unglued from a downspout. So I had to remember suddenly the password that lets and lets and lets until there is no more permission. Silhouette, imprecisely bless each footstep with light rain. I had to get rid of that shirt. I'd hung it up on the back of the like the bathroom like hang up thing, and it made this face, and suddenly I knew that this shirt was an object of such magnitude that I had to throw it away. And I realized I couldn't throw it away in the room. That was too close. So I went down to throw it away in the lobby of the hotel, and I decided I didn't want to be in the same building with it. So I took it out into the streets of Sacramento to find the right place for it. Hurried home. I think it was the right thing to do.
I have a couple of questions from Facebook. Kay McIntyre would like to know, how has your writing changed over the years?
I think it's become, on one hand, looser and less forced, less insistent. And on the other hand, has become more focused. A lot of that had to do with becoming a parent 8 years ago, where previously I could just write endlessly into my notebook at a coffee shop or bar or wherever, and then transcribe it and, type it all out a few times a year and sort of find the poem inside of it. And then that luxury quickly evaporated. I mean, I had to write most of the poem in my head as I was, cleaning the house or holding the baby. And then when I had a chance, I could kind of jot it down really quickly. But in order to compose a poem in my head, I had to really have something, a clear line through it, something to really, hold it in my memory and to be able to remember the developments of it, like memorizing a poem or memorizing a song or lines for a play. And that, in order to hold something in my head that long, it had to have a clear subject or a clear initiating subject. And so that, I think, changed the way I write for the better. I think I became more was able to develop an idea or an image or a line more fully than I had before.
Okay, the next one is from Cooper Olson. You're a good memorizer. What poem that you're able to recite have you been thinking about with all of the news going on lately, or relating to your book, or all of it?
I think Cooper, one of my dearest friends there, who's a van aficionado. He's restored an old van, which I think is more of a poem than anything that I've ever written. But I think he might be thinking of Eric McHenry when he says I'm good at memorizing, because he's so much better than I am. But there's a poem, an Emily Dickinson poem that I've been thinking a lot about, that's kind of about sort of dodging the bullet, which so far we have in my circle, largely. And it's called, I don't know what number it is in the Emily Dickinson poems, but it's called That After Horror. And I think this is how it goes. I'll probably forget it now. But it's that after horror, that was us who passed the brindled pier, just as the granite crumb let go, our savior by a hair. In seconds more had dropped too deep for fishermen to plumb. The very profile of the thought leaves recognition numb. The possibility to pass without a moment's bell into conjecture's hands is like a face of steel that suddenly leans into ours with its metallic grin, the cordiality of death who drills his welcome in. It's a good poem right there. I have a little poetry group with some novelists and playwrights who are much more accomplished and brilliant than I could ever hope to be, but who want to know more about poetry. They're not trying to write it. They just kind of want to become more familiar with it. So they memorize a poem every week, and we talk about it. And it's been fascinating because these are, people, really top of their fields, tremendously educated, very well read, and they have never needed to really read any more poetry than anybody else has ever had. So it's kind of new to them. They're vaguely familiar with some poems and some poets, but then I'll lay something out for them, and they'll expect one reaction and get a different one. And one of the things that's interesting is they're not tabula rasa, but as far as poetry goes, they don't have any real skin in the game, and so they tend to find more value memorizing and talking about some poets that we would say are kind of neglected or overlooked, like William Meredith or Edward Arlington Robinson, than the poets that everybody's supposed to like. And all four of them, none of them liked Emily Dickinson after really memorizing a poem and talking about. One of them had actually written on the Emily Dickinson television show, and knew more facts about Emily Dickinson. But then actually spending an hour and a half talking about it, they were like, we don't like Emily Dickinson. It's like, no, sacrilege. But it's refreshing to me because I have so many assumptions about kind of the Mount Rushmores of poetry. I love that poem, but you have to be willing to, in order to find new things, you have to be willing to reimagine some of the older things. This is the subject of the day, right? But I still like that poem. I like Emily Dickinson just fine. Any other questions? Dickinson or otherwise?
Looks like there's one more in our Q&A here, Ed, from Daniel Whitaker. Who is your favorite comedian, and does any of their humor or style of humor make its way into your work?
Is Dan Whitaker a famous comedian? Because if he is, then the answer is Dan Whitaker. Favorite? Well, I mean, I do consume a lot of comedy. Right now, I think the funniest person in comedy is not a stand-up comedian. The two of the funniest people, I think, are Matt Berry, British comedian, and Toast of London, and What We Do in the Shadows. Who's also a musician, and not a comedian in the stand-up sense. Another great comedy writer is Tom Sharpling, although again not as much of a performer. I like comedy writers a lot, not humorists. I don't like a humorist, but I like comedy writers, maybe more than performers. Those are two people who are very much on my mind lately in terms of comedy. But yeah, I don't know. Those are maybe not satisfying answers, but I recommend them.
I'm a big Matt Berry fan too. He's
the greatest.
He's amazing.
He's the greatest. Yes.
In the IT crowd, anything that he does.
Oh, I know who Dan is now. Hi, Dan. Yeah. He's not a famous comedian.
We do have one more question from Facebook. Did your understanding of evil change as you explored the topic in these poems? And that's from Annis.
Hi, Annis. Oh, I can't claim that it did. I mean, ultimately, as has been pointed out, evil is banal, right? It's not interesting, but I think one still has to contend with it. But in the process of writing, of trying to write in a way, having instances of trying deliberately to imagine evil acts, people who would think of as evil, I think it did widen my understanding of love. You know, the Timothy McVeigh poem, you know, is only after writing. The published version is 4 or 5 pages, but the original, I mean, that was going to become, I mean, that could have become its own book. I mean, the original draft was 20 or 30 pages, and I decided that it was not necessary for it to be that long, probably not necessarily be as long as it is. But in sort of imagining, you know, ways in which I am like Timothy McVeigh, or Timothy McVeigh was like me, which is the most ordinary ways, is that nobody is that special. Most everybody's experiences are fairly common. You know, you're born, you were a child, you had a mother or father figures of some kind. Your body changes, you have initiations, and you end up, you know, following a path, whatever it is. Is it an imagining sort of that being in the Dreamland Hotel the night before going, is that up until the last minute, he could have changed his mind. And it was actually a great relief, and after writing so much on it, to realize that I could change my mind, that the me that, well, in imagining being Timothy McVeigh, I could also imagine walking away from the van. I mean, you know, he did walk away from the van in Oklahoma, but walking away from the van in Junction City. I mean, at any point you can turn away from it and change. And that might take courage, and I say it's a beautiful cowardice of love. I mean, I wish he had been more of a coward, and then a lot of children would have lived. I mean, it's coward. His terroristic act was cowardice, but he could have performed another kind of cowardice, which would be a courageous kind of not going through with it. And so one thinks of how often has one not gone through with something, and what is it that animates that turning away from evil? Well, I suppose it's love, right? And so I think I wept when I realized that that although love doesn't always win, it is more powerful, and it is healing.
Well said, Ed. I think
the banjo's too far away, Cooper. Yeah.
You got your banjo right there?
No, I do not.
You're not. Well, I think we've gotten through all the questions, and you know, I just really appreciated getting to check in with you and chat with you and hear some of your poems aloud. I wish we were doing this in person here in Lawrence. It would be lovely to see you, not on a screen. But thank you so much. Did you have any last words you'd like to share? Those last ones were quite poignant.
I'm gonna leave those as my last words. Aside from thanking you, Brad, and Kristen, and the Lawrence Public Library, and the Raven Bookstore, and everybody for watching and listening tonight.
Yeah, please check out Ed's book if you haven't already. As he said, Raven will have copies that are signed by Ed. Kristen has put the link in there. If you want to order it from them, they'll ship it. You could pick it up at their curbside delivery. We'll have signed copies. And this is the way that we're doing book events now in this disassociated video world that we live in. But I had so much fun, Ed. And it is always a pleasure. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Brad. Take care.
See you at Spaghetti Wednesday soon, I'm sure.
Yeah, we'll see you soon. Yeah. All right.
Is there anything that we need to say, Kristen, in wrapping up, or do we just hit this button to turn this off?
It's kind of sad because when we had these events in-house, you know, you got to be with the author and ask more questions, and there was just a much more graceful ending, but I just click a little red button that says end. So I guess thank you, Ed, so much for coming, or so much for being a part of this. I think this is our second event with you, and it's just so lovely to have you in-house, whether it's in the library or on our screens.
Oh, shucks.
It's absolutely lovely to have you. So thank you.
Nice to you, and thanks all my just looking down the list of participants and seeing so many friends I'd love to be chatting with or be with, and we'll see you all down the line.
Okay.
I'm sure of it.
Well, and take good care, Ed, and everyone who showed up. Thank you so much. This is really lovely. I think Kristen's going to hit end meeting for all.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm going to hit the big red button, but thank you all
right.
so much.
Good night, everybody.
Okay. Good night.
Thanks again.